Some might say this is smutty. I'll say you're wrong. Okay. Hi, my name is Dina. I'm a life and career coach specializing in career change and career development. But in this video, I'm going to be doing something different. I'm going to be talking about books. Specifically, I've picked out 5 books that have stood out to me, really impacted me, or I think warrant some discussion. These are the 5. Some of them you might expect a coach to read. Others you might not. But don't judge a book by its cover. I'm going to talk you through them, tell you what I loved about them, what I didn't find useful, and hopefully 1 or 2 of these books might sneak onto your list for next year and, I don't know, potentially change your life, or at least give you some enjoyment. But before I get into that, I want to say one thing, and that is the guarantee that will change your life next year is the Career Change Summit that I'm organizing. It's happening 16th to 18th of January. It's free. It's online. All you have to do is register below and I'll give you all the details. It's 3 days packed full of just really useful information from my network. I have gathered coaches, therapists, ex-recruiters, membership organizers, just different people. And I'm getting them to share their stories of how they did it, or giving you useful how-to guides, how to get into freelance, how to make a career change in your 40s. It's all varied and it's going to be so useful, so sign up below. So there is an actual strategy that I follow, but I don't just read random books or anything. I have different genres that I read from that kind of help inform me as a coach. So every year I'll read a book from coaching. So something about coaching by a coach or to do with coaching. I'll also go into the world of therapy or counseling, psychology, read something within that realm as well. I will also read a book from kind of the personal development world / business, so business book, anything to do with self-employment or also personal development, kind of performance-based as well. I will also read a biography, and I'll tell you why I read biographies when we get to this book. And of course, fiction. Yeah, because you got to enjoy yourself, you know. That's my reading strategy. Do you have one? Let me know in the comments. The first book that we're going to start off with is this one, The Ride of a Lifetime by Robert Iger, who is the CEO of Walt Disney. So this is part memoir, part biography, part business lessons, part leadership lessons. But before we get into the book, I'm going to tell you about why I read biographies. It all happened when I attended a lecture by Tal Ben-Shahar, who is, he's a teacher, educator, writer, author, speaker, specifically on positive psychology. He headed up the Harvard's positive psychology class. And when he taught it, it became one of the most well-attended and popular courses. I think the second most popular course in Harvard history. So he's a great teacher. So I went to see him talk live in London. And he said, so many people ask me for book recommendations. And they want to know, what is the best book to read about happiness, about success, fulfillment, positive psychology, all of that. And he says, I don't actually point them to a positive psychology book. I tell them to read biographies. Because within biographies, they give you context. They don't just give you life lessons, which some personal development or self-development books do. They're kind of just lessons. Whereas biographies are steeped in context, in emotion. So when you read it, you can put yourself in that context and think, what would I do? They drive the lesson home a lot more. And I loved his answer for that. And so after that, I started reading biographies. Please give me your biography recommendations below. I read Anthony Kiedis', the lead singer of Red Hot Chili Peppers. His one is called Scar Tissue. Amazing. I read Steve Martin as well. I really like reading about creatives, about performers or innovative minds or leaders. So that's kind of the books I tend to gravitate towards. Again, recommendations most welcome. So let's get back to this one. This was a really easy read. I picked up this book when I was flying for a business trip. And I read it in the time, so about 4 days. By the time I came back, I finished it. And it was such a good book to read whilst on that business trip because I was flying to deliver a workshop for a team of creatives. And this was a really handy companion because obviously he's had to lead creatives and all sorts of creatives, in Disney and ABC before that. So let me tell you a little about him. Basically, he will guide you through his career history. He was at ABC Network before. He was a senior program executive, and then he was director, all of those kind of things. In his job, he was the one that gave Twin Peaks the green light back in the day. And so when he talks you through it from his ABC days, he talks a lot about the managers, the leaders he had, and how the CEOs acted in the time there. It's just really useful to know because, you know, how many companies are we going to work at? How many leaders are we going to be working under? We only know what we know. So it's really handy just to know what other people are doing, not only in other companies, but in other countries, in other cultures, in other industries as well. So I found that really, really useful. You might find it useful as well, like especially if you listen to the podcast, you know, Diary of a CEO or Stephen Bartlett. And that is great. It's an hour discussion from a CEO and all of that. Whereas this is a whole book. It really takes you on the journey, the growth, the ups, the downs, like the tension parts of it. He started off at ABC, then he went into Disney, and then he's, you know, worked his way up and became the CEO, retired, and then they asked for him back. What I loved about his part in Disney as well, he talks you through the different mergers and acquisitions, takeovers, whatever you call them, that he did. So Disney, they acquired or absorbed Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilms, 20th Century Fox. And you know, acquisitions, they're not easy things to do, and you have to negotiate. So it taught me quite a few things about negotiation because he talks through how he did it. The other thing I loved is it just reassured me. I do not ever want to have the job of a CEO. I read that and I was like, good, I've had an insight. I know what it's like. I don't want that job. But it's such an easy read, really interesting. I would highly recommend it. Now on to my next book. This is my coaching book. It is Jenny Rogers, Are You Listening? It's Stories from a Coaching Life. It's a book by a coach, written by a coach, kind of for coaches, but I'd say it's more than for coaches. I'd say if it's especially great for HR, also good for managers and leaders. But I say anyone with an interest in what happens behind closed doors, like how do coaches work? What does a coaching situation looks like? If you're curious about the kind of problems that leaders have, this is a really good book. It is written so well. I think she used to be either worked for the BBC or she was in media or something, but she is eloquent. What I love about it is there's no extra words, no fluff. Everything's just clear. Have you read books that are just full of fluff? A lot of personal development. It's like they make their point and then they labor their point paragraph after paragraph, and you're reading it like 5 pages in being like, I get it. No, I got it the first time. Please don't talk down to me. This one is not like that. She's such a great reader. The other thing I absolutely love about this is each chapter is a different client. And so she tells you the story of that client, but also what's happening with her as well, written in such a lovely way. It was such a pleasure just to like dip in and dip out, you know, read a chapter and kind of mull over it. So she'll tell you about the kind of people that she coaches. So she'll tell you a story about someone who's been promoted to manager or leader because they're really good at what they do, but they're not a really good manager. So then she gets brought in to coach them. Oh, she'll tell you the story. Oh, this is the other thing. She'll tell you the story about accidentally coaching a psychopath. She shares a lot about her, which really, really helps. So what's going on for her and the kind of thoughts that she was going through. So you get to see both sides, which I absolutely love. I've read a similar book, For Coaches by Coaches, where each chapter, you know, there was like perfectionism, this, imposter syndrome, that wasn't as beautifully written as this one. And it's deeply compassionate. Super insightful as well. Really reassuring for coaches because one of them was like what to do when you're coaching someone who's ridiculously wealthy. Like she had a story, ridiculously wealthy, and she's coaching him on the fact that he's got a lot of money, he's just sold a business. What's he going to do next when he can do anything? And as a coach, you can separate that. But she, at that time, a lot of her money and savings were going on to help her husband who was disabled and was quickly declining in health. So it was a real sore spot for her. Like she was very much aware of, you know, money and lack of, and then at the same time coaching someone who had an abundance. And those kind of situations we're going to come across, and we learn best from stories of other people and how they did it and how they managed it. So it's a really great add-on to any coach, but also just for anyone who's curious about what goes on in coaching sessions and how coaches handle certain situations. Absolutely loved it. Highly recommend it. So the next book I'm going to recommend is No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. This will not be on your radar unless you're a coach or therapist. Is it for people outside coaching therapy? Yes, I think it is. I think all books are, but let me tell you about this one. Richard Schwartz, he is the founder of Internal Family Systems, IFS. It's an approach to therapy. It's different to a psychodynamic, you know, talking therapy. It's a little bit more more spiritual as well. I love it. I got introduced to IFS a couple of years ago, and I've read another book of his, and No Bad Parts is a really, really good one for you as a therapist, you as a coach, but also you as someone who wants to heal. Also good for you if you haven't tried therapy and you're curious about it, or you've tried therapy and you've been disappointed about it. I mean, this is not a replacement for therapists, but it has some exercises that you can do that will help you talk to your parts. So let me quickly introduce parts. Basically, what IFS says is that we're not a monomind. We're not just one being. We are made up of different parts within us. And some parts want different things for us. Some want to protect us, such as the perfectionist or the critic. They protect us by kind of keeping us away from things. And there's some other parts that carry wounds, memories, trauma, and we haven't maybe let ourselves even feel those parts. It talks you through exercises that you can do to get to know your different parts. Richard stumbled upon IFS. It wasn't taught. He founded it and discovered it because he was trained family therapist and he was trained in systemic coaching, but the methods that he was trained in, that he was using for his patients, for his clients, weren't working. And he tells a story about how he actually discovered the whole talking to parts notion. It was working with a bulimic patient and working on those urges. He tried the tactics to, suppress those urges and like fight them or do anything. And it just wasn't working. In fact, it was getting worse. And so then he was just a breaking point and he started to talk to the parts. Instead of those urges, he started to talk and listen and find out what it is they wanted. And the most miraculous thing happened. Healing happened naturally, quicker than ever imagined as well. So he realized that we have different parts within us that have a message to say, have a story. They need to be heard, they need to be felt, recognized, seen, and comforted. They're not bad things, hence the name. No bad parts. We might want to push down a part of us because we haven't fully accepted it, but when we learn how to speak to them, we start to form a friendship. They feel safe within us and they feel safe enough to release whatever they have been carrying. I have tried IFS myself, and I'll tell you, the sensation is, it's like a load has been lifted. It feels like you're more kind of in alignment once you do some of these exercises. I will warn you that it's not a replacement for therapy. This is best done with a therapist or as an introduction before you go to see an IFS therapist, but it's magical and wonderful. The other thing I should tell you about is how he writes. Richard has been doing this for 40 years. And when someone knows their area of speciality so well that the writing is very simple, gentle, clear, no jargon, no fluff. You don't think at one point that this is like a professor talking down to you. And I loved his writing style. This one was a pleasure. Okay, so my next book is from the self-development world. It's Atomic Habits by James Clear. For sure, you would have seen this on the bookshelves, in the airport. You would have heard someone talking about it. It's got a lot of publicity. Sure, you would have thought that I have already read this book. I'm a coach, right? Habits. That's what I do. No, I haven't. I've been coaching for 8 years and no, I haven't. Why haven't I? Well, I think when it came out, I was aware that it came out and I heard someone on the radio saying that he took a lot of his stuff from the book Tiny Habits by B.J. Fogg. And B.J. Fogg is a behavioral scientist. He's got, I think, a lab in Stanford, so he does a lot of experiments. So he talks from research. James Clear was a blogger before this. Yes, he does have science in the book, but he collates it and collects it and curates it and gives it to you. He doesn't write from experience. Not that it should put anyone off, but I think I was put off for a couple of years. But then after a while, I was like, oh, do you know what? I'm going to have to read it because I know some of my clients would have read it and then will ask me about it and I need to know whether I can recommend it or not. So what do I think? I knew 90% of it or 80% of it. I think if you're not new to personal development, if you've read any kind of behavioral change books, personal development, any kind of psychology books, this might not be new to you. I did learn something new. I do like his thing about systems. That was new for me and I really liked it. And so he's got a quote in there that says, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And he has a whole thing about systems. I really love that. I also love that he covers identity because that is what it's about. It's changing your identity when you are trying to, create a new habit or make a behavior change. The rest of it I already knew, but I don't know where you are on your personal development journey. So if you haven't really read up about habits, start here for sure. And if you want to change something in your life, if you want to take up an instrument or be healthier, work out more, then this book could help. What I struggled on is it's quite formulaic. I've read a few of these books already. I think Malcolm Gladwell was Outliers. I think that was that I read first. It's written like this. At the beginning of the chapter, they introduce you to some athlete in 1962 or some scientist or an Olympic team that did this one trick or did this one method and it made them win. And then he takes that one thing and he's like, that's what I call call habit stacking, or that's what I call yada da, and then explains that point. When I was first introduced to that way of writing and reading, I was like, great, I'm learning about these weird people. I really liked it for, I don't know, shock value, for novelty. But then every other personal development book had the same formula, and I'm getting tired of it now. The examples he gives, about athletes or things like that, they're not me or you, So I actually prefer this book where it's everyday stories of everyday people. It's a lot more relatable. So I don't like that formula now anymore, but you might, who knows. Now, my fiction book. If you know, you know. If you don't, you might have seen Akatar, Akatar on Instagram or maybe even TikTok. And if you go looking for it now, then you will enter the world of Bookstagram. Your algorithm will change, so I'm sorry about that. Some might say this is smutty. I'll say you're wrong. Okay, I was on holiday with my sister and I'd finished the books that I had taken, and she said, read this, and I inhaled it. I love world building, and it's crazy because I do actually like sci-fi films, but I just never thought to go into the genre of fantasy. But what I'm going to tell you about this book might not be what you expect to hear about this book. I'm not going to talk about the romance or anything else like that. I'm going to talk about something else. I reflected upon, after reading this book, I reflected and I was like, why did it just resonate with me so much? Why do I love it so much? And it's because it spoke to something that I feel is missing in our world today. It builds a world where there's humans and there's Fays. I think I'm pronouncing it right, Fays, and there's lords, high lords, high priestesses, lesser Fays, all of that. So there's a ranking system, hierarchy. The high lords in this fantasy world are from a different time. They have honor. They do the right thing even if it's hard. It's like, oh gosh, I haven't seen honor in leadership. I haven't seen honor in years, maybe decades. And this book is also about bravery. Like the lead character, she, just constantly faces fear, and yet she just does the right thing even if it's scary. I know it really left a mark on me, and it made me want to bring more honor into this world, especially now in the times that we live in, the times of ghosting. Emails left unanswered, companies that you apply for never get back to you, friends, how we leave each other's messages read and unreplied to for weeks and weeks and weeks. And slowly that's become the norm. And reading this book, I was like, no, I don't want it to be that. I want to do the honorable thing. And so I was like, right, I am going to start getting back to my friends sooner. The right thing to do, the honorable thing is just to get back to someone quickly, to show them that they mean something to you, that you value their message. It also inspired me to be more brave. I think all of us don't realize when we slipped into a comfort zone. It's inevitable because it's comfortable. So it reminded me to be braver and inspired actually the Career Change Summit. I thought about the summit, and it's just a big thing to do. And so I was like, well, you know what? I want to do something big. I want to do something bigger than me. And like Fair did in this book, like really take something on. So it was a really inspiring and uplifting book. So I think actually reading something like this, completely different to coaching, to psychology, to self-development, is really, really good because it makes you think differently and inspires you in ways you wouldn't even have expected it to. I hope you've enjoyed me delving into the 5 books. Hope you're taking something from it. Tell me what you think. Have you read the books? If you haven't read the books, tell me in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Love to hear and what books you're reading next year. But before we sign off, I do want to remind you that the online Career Change Summit is happening in January 16th to the 18th. It's free, and I would love to see you there so that you can get inspired to do something brave, to do something different this year, and finally get into a job that you absolutely love.